Have you ever felt like your brain just operates kind of differently?
Like on a different wavelength than everyone else's.
Yeah, like you're trying to fit into a world that wasn't designed for how you think.
Right.
I think we're going to be diving into that today.
I think so too.
Um, with this article
Yeah.
from Very Well Mind called "What Does It Mean to Be Neurodivergent?"
It's a good one.
I have to say I'm already having some light bulb moments just from reading it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
It's really more than a buzzword, isn't it?
What is?
It's like neurodiversity is about recognizing that there isn't just one right way for a brain to work.
Totally. And that's what's so intriguing about this deep dive. We're not just defining it, but exploring what it could mean for you, the listener.
Right.
You might even discover that you fall under this umbrella yourself.
Exactly.
So let's unpack the core concept here.
Yep.
What exactly is neurodiversity?
Well, at its heart, it's the idea that brains function and behave in a variety of ways,
Okay.
and that these variations are totally natural. It's a shift away from viewing certain neurological differences as like abnormal
Right.
or deficits,
Yeah.
and instead recognizing them as valuable parts of human diversity.
You know, I think we're so conditioned to think of certain ways of thinking as like the normal way
Absolutely.
that we don't even realize there's a whole spectrum of possibilities.
Right.
Like someone might be incredibly gifted at math but struggle with social cues.
Mhm.
And we automatically label that as a problem that needs to be fixed.
Right, and that's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Neurodiversity challenges those assumptions. It asks, what if those differences aren't problems but strengths?
I like that.
And it encourages us to think about how society can adapt to accommodate different ways of being rather than trying to force everyone into the same mold.
Yes. So to get a little more specific, how do we distinguish between neurotypical and neurodivergent?
Well, think of neurotypical as like the dominant or statistically common way that brains function, behave, and process information.
Okay.
It's kind of like the baseline that other variations are compared against.
Gotcha. So neurodivergent essentially means that someone's brain operates differently from that baseline in one or more ways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it can manifest in a wide range of ways, from subtle differences that might go unnoticed to more significant variations that impact daily life.
The article mentions sociologist Judy Singer, who coined the term neurodiversity back in 1997.
Yep.
It's amazing how this concept has gained traction in recent years.
It really is.
That's
Absolutely. As we understand the brain better and embrace diversity in all its forms, neurodiversity is increasingly seen as like a valuable lens to view human potential.
I like that. Okay, so we've got the basics down. Now I'm really curious about the types of neurodiversity.
Yeah,
Where do we even begin? This feels like a huge E umbrella.
it is. A huge umbrella. And the first thing to remember is that it isn't a single condition or diagnosis.
Right.
It encompasses a whole spectrum of experiences.
So let's dive into some specific examples. You mentioned autism earlier.
Yeah.
And I know that's often described as a spectrum disorder. What does that actually mean in practical terms?
Well, it means that people with autism experience a range of autistic traits and support needs.
Okay.
There's no one-size-fits-all presentation of autism.
Right.
Some individuals might have significant challenges with social interaction and communication, while others might be highly verbal and excel in specific areas of interest.
I remember reading Thinking in Pictures by Temple Grandin,
Oh, yeah?
and it completely changed how I think about autism.
Mhm.
Her ability to visualize and think in images is incredible, and it highlights how different brains can excel in different ways.
Absolutely. And it speaks to the importance of moving away from outdated labels and recognizing the individual strengths within neurodiversity.
Yes.
It's worth noting that terms like Asperger's or PDD are no longer used in the autistic community.
Really?
They've all been grouped under the umbrella of autism spectrum disorder. Specifically, Asperger's is considered outdated and even offensive by some.
So if someone were to say they're autistic, we'd understand that encompasses a whole range of experiences and presentations.
Exactly. The Autism Self-Advocacy Network defines it as consistent differences in thinking, sensory processing, movement, communication, and socialization compared to non-autistic or allistic people.
So it sounds like there's a lot to unpack with autism alone, but I know there are other types of neurodiversity we need to explore too.
Absolutely.
What about ADHD? I feel like that one's often misunderstood.
Definitely. People often picture someone with ADHD as hyperactive and unable to sit still, but it's far more nuanced than that.
Oh, right.
ADHD is actually categorized as an executive function disorder.
Hold on, executive function. Can you break that down for me? What does that actually mean?
Sure. Executive function refers to a set of mental skills that help us manage our thoughts, attention, behaviors, and emotions.
Okay.
Think of it as the control center of your brain, helping you plan, organize focus, and control impulses.
So someone with ADHD might have difficulty with things like starting tasks,
Hmm.
staying organized, remembering deadlines, or managing their emotions in stressful situations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that can impact everything from schoolwork and job performance to relationships and daily life.
But I've also heard that people with ADHD can have incredible strengths too.
For sure.
Like they're often highly creative, energetic, and great at thinking outside the box.
Absolutely. Those are just a few of the potential strengths associated with ADHD. Others include being highly empathetic, having a strong sense of justice, and excelling in fast-paced environments. It's all about recognizing that different ways of thinking can lead to unique advantages.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've talked about autism and ADHD. What about dyslexia?
Yeah.
I know a lot of people have heard of it, but maybe don't fully understand what it entails.
Yeah, dyslexia is a learning disorder that primarily affects reading and language processing.
So it's not just about having trouble reading.
Right. People with dyslexia might struggle with things like sounding out words, recognizing letters, spelling, and even understanding written language.
Oh, wow.
They might also have difficulty with spoken language, like expressing themselves clearly or following directions.
I imagine that could be incredibly frustrating in a world that relies so heavily on written and spoken communication.
You're absolutely right. But just like with ADHD and autism, there are potential strengths associated with dyslexia too.
Like what?
Well, people with dyslexia often excel in areas like visual and spatial reasoning, problem solving, and creative thinking.
Interesting.
They might be great at seeing the big picture, coming up with innovative ideas, or thinking outside the box.
It seems like there's a recurring theme here that what might be perceived as a weakness in one context could actually be a strength in another.
That's the beauty of neurodiversity. It challenges us to reframe our understanding of what's considered normal and to appreciate the unique contributions of different minds.
So we've covered autism, ADHD, and dyslexia. But those are just a few examples, right?
Right.
What are some other conditions that fall under the neurodiversity umbrella?
Well, some other types you might have heard of include Tourette syndrome, dyspraxia, synesthesia, and dyscalculia. There's also Down syndrome, epilepsy, and even some chronic mental illnesses like bipolar disorder, OCD, borderline personality disorder, anxiety and depression.
Wow, that's quite a wide range.
It is.
It really underscores how diverse the human experience can be, even at the neurological level.
And here's the thing, many people don't even realize they're neurodivergent until adulthood.
Interesting.
They might have always felt different or struggled in certain areas, but never had a framework to understand why.
I can see how learning about neurodiversity could be a real aha moment for someone. It's like finally having a language to describe your own experiences.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that understanding can be incredibly validating and empowering. It can help people make sense of their past, embrace their strengths, and connect with the community of others who share similar experiences.
So for someone listening to this right now and thinking, wait a minute, this sounds like me, maybe I am neurodivergent, what would you say to them?
First and foremost, remember that there's no shame in being neurodivergent. It's simply a different way of being. If you're resonating with these characteristics, I'd encourage you to explore further. Do some research, learn more about different types of neurodivergence, and consider seeking a professional assessment if you feel it's necessary.
And it's important to acknowledge that self-diagnosis is valid, especially for those who might not have access to formal assessments or who face barriers to diagnosis.
Right.
Ultimately, it's about honoring your own experiences and seeking the support and understanding that feels right for you.
Absolutely. And as we move forward in this deep dive, I think it's essential to keep in mind that neurodiversity is about more than just labels and diagnoses.
Okay.
It's about recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of every individual, regardless of how their brain is wired.
It's so well said. It sounds like we're just scratching the surface here, and I'm eager to delve deeper into what it actually means to live with neurodiversity. But for now, let's pause and reflect on what we've learned so far.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork for understanding what neurodiversity is, but I'm really curious about the lived experience of neurodiversity.
Yeah.
Such a broad concept, and I imagine it varies wildly from person to person.
You're absolutely right. Saying, what's it like to be neurodivergent is almost like asking, what's it like to be human?
Right.
There's just so much variation and nuance within the neurodivergent community. Someone with ADHD might navigate the world very differently from someone with autism.
Yeah.
And even within those categories, experiences can differ dramatically.
Right. It's not about making generalizations or assumptions based on labels.
Exactly.
It's about understanding individual needs, strengths, and challenges.
Precisely. And that's why I think exploring neurodiversity through personal accounts can be so powerful.
Reading books, watching documentaries, or listening to podcasts created by neurodivergent individuals can offer invaluable insights.
You've got me thinking about a book I read a while back called Funny You Don't Look Autistic by Harriet Smith.
Oh, yeah?
It's a witty and relatable take on navigating the world as an autistic person. And it really opened my eyes to the nuances of social interaction and communication that I hadn't considered before.
That's a great example. Humor can be such a powerful tool for breaking down stigma and fostering understanding. Speaking of powerful books, the Very Well Mind article we read also recommended Look Me in the Eye by John Elder Robison. Have you heard of that one?
I have. It's a memoir by John Elder Robison, who has autism, and I've heard it's incredibly insightful. It's on my reading list.
It's definitely worth checking out. And for a perspective on how different minds can excel in different ways, there's Thinking in Pictures by Temple Grandin.
Oh, I actually mentioned Thinking in Pictures earlier.
Oh, awesome.
That book totally blew my mind. The idea that someone can think primarily in images challenges everything we assume about cognition, right?
It really does. And it speaks to the power of neurodiversity. I imagine the incredible contributions we miss out on when we try to force everyone to think and learn in the same way.
It makes you wonder how many brilliant minds are out there being overlooked or underestimated because they don't fit the traditional mold.
Absolutely. And that's why representation matters. Seeing ourselves reflected in books, movies, and other forms of media can be so validating and empowering. Speaking of representation, are you interested in exploring some fiction that features neurodivergent characters?
Oh, I love that idea. Fiction can be such a powerful way to explore complex themes and develop empathy. Do you have any favorites?
Well, the article mentioned Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine. Have you read that one?
I haven't, but it's been on my list forever. I've heard it's a really heartwarming and nuanced portrayal of social awkwardness and finding connection. I'm definitely bumping it to the top of my list now.
It's a great read. And for a more classic take, there's Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes.
Oh, wow, that's a heavy hitter. It's the story of a man with an intellectual disability who undergoes an experimental procedure to increase his intelligence, right?
Yes, and it raises some really thought-provoking questions about intelligence identity and what it means to be human.
It definitely makes you think about the ethical implications of trying to fix or normalize people who think differently. Speaking of ethical considerations, the article also mentioned a dystopian novel called On the Edge of Gone by Corinne Doivas.
Oh, yes. That one's set in a future where neurodivergent people are often seen as a burden and face discrimination,
Wow.
which sadly reflects the reality for many people, even today.
That's a sobering thought. It highlights how important it is to challenge societal biases and advocate for a more inclusive world.
Absolutely. And if you're looking to dive deeper into the history and social context of neurodiversity, I highly recommend Neurotribes by Steve Silverman. It's a groundbreaking work that challenges the pathologizing narrative that has surrounded autism for so long.
Neurotribes is on my reading list, too. I've heard it's essential reading for understanding the neurodiversity movement.
It really is. And for a more focused look at the strengths and talents associated with neurodiversity, there's Neurodiversity. Discovering the Extraordinary Gifts of Autism, ADHD, Dyslexia, and Other Brain Differences by Thomas Armstrong. It's a great resource for reframing how we think about these differences.
Instead of seeing them as limitations, we can start to appreciate the unique gifts they bring to the world, right?
Exactly. And lastly, they recommended Divergent Mind by Gennaro Nierenberg. It explores the experiences of women with neurodiversity, which is an often overlooked perspective. It's crucial to ensure we're considering the diverse experiences within the neurodivergent community.
I wholeheartedly agree. Representation matters, and it's essential to highlight the voices and perspectives of those who have been historically marginalized or underrepresented.
And beyond books, there's a wealth of information available through podcasts and social media. The article mentioned a few podcasts like the Neurodiversity Podcast, Neurodiverging, and Sensory Matters, all of which offer valuable insights and discussions.
Social media can be a fantastic way to connect with neurodivergent creators and advocates directly. I've learned so much from following accounts like Neurodivergent Activist, Nurturing Neurodiversity, Paige Lael, and The Chronic Couple.
It's amazing to see people sharing their lived experiences, advocating for change, and building community online.
It really highlights the power of storytelling and personal narratives to break down stigma and foster understanding. But, as we're exploring all these different resources, I'm realizing there's a lot of work to be done in terms of creating a truly inclusive society for neurodivergent individuals. It's not just about awareness, it's about systemic change.
They're absolutely right. Recognizing and understanding neurodiversity is a great starting point. But it's not enough. We need to look at the systems and structures that create barriers for neurodivergent individuals and work to change them.
So where do we even begin with that? What are some practical steps we can take to move towards a more neuro-inclusive world?
Well, I think education is key.
Right.
The more we understand about neurodiversity, the more we can challenge our own biases and assumptions. And that starts with open conversations like the one we're having right now.
I love that knowledge is power, and the more we know, the more equipped we are to advocate for change. But beyond education, what else can we do?
Well, one important step is creating environments that are truly accessible and welcoming to everyone.
Okay.
This might mean providing flexible work arrangements, offering different learning styles in schools, or simply being more mindful of sensory sensitivities in public spaces.
It sounds like it's about designing for diversity, not just assuming everyone experiences the world in the same way.
You got it.
Yeah.
And that's where the concept of universal design comes in.
Now, you mentioned universal design earlier. Can you unpack that a little for me? What does that look like in practice?
Sure. Universal design is the idea that we should design spaces, products, and systems to be usable by as many people as possible, regardless of their abilities or disabilities.
So instead of creating something and then trying to retrofit it to accommodate different needs, we design it inclusively from the start.
Exactly. For example, instead of having a building with only stairs, we design it with ramps and elevators from the get-go. That benefits people in wheelchairs, but it also helps parents with strollers, people with heavy luggage delivery drivers, everyone.
Right. It's about creating a world that works for everyone, not just the average person.
Precisely. And ultimately, I think that's what neurodiversity is all about, creating a world where everyone can thrive and contribute their unique talents and perspectives.
I love that. It's about celebrating our differences and recognizing that those differences make us stronger and more resilient as a society.
Exactly. And with that in mind, perhaps it's time to shift gears and explore some of the broader societal implications of neurodiversity.
Yes, let's do that. We've covered a lot of ground already, but I'm eager to delve deeper into how we can collectively build a more neuro-inclusive future. But for now, let's take a moment to let all this information sink in. Okay, so we're back
Back again.
and ready to dive into part 3.
Yes.
I feel like my brain is buzzing with all these new ideas about neurodiversity. So you've talked about what it is,
Right.
explored different examples, and even delved into personal stories. But now I'm wondering, how do we take all this understanding and actually apply it to create a more inclusive world?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's one thing to recognize neurodiversity on an individual level,
Yeah.
but creating real change requires us to think bigger.
Yeah.
We need to look at the systems and structures that often create barriers for neurodivergent individuals.
Okay, so let's get specific. What kind of systems are we talking about?
Well, think about our education system.
Okay.
It's often designed with a very narrow definition of normal in mind. Standardized tests, strict classroom structures, and emphasis on verbal communication. These can all pose challenges for students who learn and process information differently.
It's like we're trying to fit square pegs into round holes, expecting everyone to conform to the same mold.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly frustrating and demoralizing for neurodivergent students.
Yeah.
It can make them feel like they're not good enough
Right.
or that they're somehow broken.
So what's the alternative? How do we design an education system that truly embraces neurodiversity?
Well, it starts with recognizing that there are many different ways to learn and demonstrate knowledge.
Okay.
Instead of a one-size-fits-all approach, we need to provide multiple pathways for students to access and engage with information.
So offering different learning styles, allowing for movement and breaks, incorporating visual aids, and providing alternative assessment.
Exactly. It's about creating an environment where every student feels seen, heard, and supported. And it's not just about education, it's also about the workplace.
Oh, absolutely. I can imagine the traditional office environment with its open floor plans, constant interruptions, and emphasis on social interaction could be a nightmare for some neurodivergent individuals.
You're right. Those types of environments can be incredibly overwhelming and make it difficult for neurodivergent individuals to focus and be productive.
So what can employers do to create a more inclusive workplace?
Well, one key step is providing flexible work arrangements.
All right.
Allowing for remote work, flexible hours, or quiet workspaces can make a huge difference for employees who need more control over their environment.
And it's not just about physical space, right? It's also about communication styles and social expectations.
Absolutely. Employers can create a more inclusive culture by providing clear and concise communication, offering training on neurodiversity awareness, and fostering open dialogue about individual needs and accommodations.
It's about recognizing that what works for one person might not work for another, and that's okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And beyond education and the workplace, we need to think about how we can design public spaces, products, and services to be more accessible to everyone. This is where the concept of universal design comes in.
You've mentioned universal design a few times now. Can you remind me what that means?
Sure. Universal design is the idea that we should design things to be usable by as many people as possible, regardless of their abilities or disabilities. Instead of designing for the average person, we design for the widest possible range of human variation.
So, for example, instead of having a building with only stairs, we design it with ramps and elevators from the start.
Right.
It benefits people in wheelchairs, but it also helps parents with strollers, people with heavy luggage delivery drivers, everyone.
That's a great example. And it applies to so many things. Websites can be designed with features like adjustable font sizes and screen readers to make them accessible to people with visual impairments. Products can be designed with clear and intuitive interfaces that are easy for anyone to understand.
It sounds like a win-win for everyone. We create a more inclusive and accessible world, and we all benefit from the increased diversity of perspectives and experiences.
Exactly. And ultimately, I think that's what neurodiversity is all about.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that we're all different and that those differences are what make us strong.
I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive, is there any final thought you want to leave our listeners with?
I'd simply encourage everyone to continue exploring the concept of neurodiversity. Read books, watch documentaries, listen to podcasts, connect with neurodivergent individuals. The more we learn and understand, the better equipped we'll be to create a more inclusive and equitable world for everyone.
Couldn't agree more. It's been a fascinating and insightful journey, and I hope our listeners feel empowered to embrace neurodiversity in their own lives and advocate for positive change. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.